Well, there's one other huge economic thing which could end the war. Everyone says to me, look, Russia's been sanctioned. They're still doing well. Sanctions aren't working. What do you have to say about that, Bill? You're the sanctions guy. And I say, yes, Russia's been sanctioned. They're causing great pain, for sure, no doubt. Most oligarchs are spending all day, every day on the phone with lawyers trying to figure out how to get out of their sanctions and all sorts of other problems. But there's one absolutely enormous loophole, which is oil. Russia sells hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of oil, crude oil. And the money that they get from that oil is what allows Vladimir Putin to continue this war. And so as long as they can do that, he can continue this war. And so then the question is, how do we stop him from getting money from the sale of oil? And it's actually very simple. It's remarkably simple. And people say, well, the buyers of that oil are China, India, and Turkey, which is true, but it's actually 2 oil refineries in China, 4 oil refineries in India, and 2 in Turkey. And so I've got a plan, and the plan is very simple, that the West, collectively, the United States, EU, UK, Japan, etc., go to those 8 oil refineries and say, here's the ultimatum. You have until January 1st to not buy another barrel of Russian oil. Up until then, you can figure out all your arrangements. After January 1st, if we find out that you've bought a single drop of Russian oil, directly or indirectly, you will no longer be allowed to do business with us. You can't sell to us, you can't buy from us, you can't insure with us, you can't trade, you can't do anything with us. If you're a Indian oil refinery, owned privately, this is not a state business, and you can either get some cheap Russian oil and then be cut off from the rest of the world, or not get cheap Russian oil and be able to do business with the rest of the world. I believe, and I think it's realistic to believe, that that refinery will stop buying Russian oil. And if these 8 refineries that buy, I think the number is $410 billion of money that was spent on Russian oil since the war began, if they stop buying that Russian oil, in 6 months' time, Putin would be on his knees economically, and he'd be begging for any type of end to this war.
Neither of you are short on determination, I can say that. And just interestingly about the whole talk that has been about the EU money, the money that the EU has been trying to provide in reparations loan to Ukraine, it's stalled at the moment, that 140 billion euros. And it's December that there will be another decision on that. Belgium blocked it. But there's this new idea that Norwegians have come up with that maybe they could actually provide their sovereign wealth to stump up 100 billion euros. That's a good workaround, isn't it?
Well, I mean, first of all, the Belgian problem will get solved. Belgium is saying to their European allies, all the money's in our country. If there's any legal problem, we don't want to be sitting by ourselves in court. It should be all of us together. It's totally reasonable position. I'm certain that Germany and France and other countries will say, you're right. Let's sign some type of agreement to say all for one, one for all, et cetera. And the reason why I'm so confident that this money will be transferred is because the world is running out of money. We're in a moment where people don't want to pay more taxes. Governments don't want to cut expenditures. Ukraine desperately needs the money in order to fight off the Russians. We don't want to put our own soldiers in harm's way because that's what will happen if Ukraine loses. And so there's an absolute financial imperative that money gets transferred, and I'm sure it will.
Vladimir, on corruption, Ukraine is embroiled right now in its own corruption scandal over alleged scheme to divert $100 million from the energy sector at the time that it's being bombarded by Russia. President Zelensky is backing the investigation into this. If it costs him his job, is that the price you have to pay in a democracy?
Absolutely, and I'm sure Ukraine will solve all of its problems over the medium term because unlike Putin's Russia, Ukraine is a democratic country and they do have the checks and balances. Yes, they have had a problem of corruption for a long time, just like Russia had, just like many other countries in our part of Europe had. But we know, based on the experience of other countries like Georgia, for example, under President Mikhail Saakashvili and other places, that it is possible to actually completely solve this problem and move forward once you institute the right system, and once the right system is in place, to make sure that these abuses are controlled.
And in terms of the future of Russia, when you were I don't know where you were when Putin was given the red carpet treatment by Donald Trump, but that must have been a very difficult moment for you. To what extent has that set back your goals, that acceptance of him on the world stage to achieve political change in Russia?
Look, this is nothing new. The West has been appeasing and enabling Vladimir Putin for 25 years, for as long as Putin has been in power, even though it was clear from the very beginning where this regime was going to go. You know, among his first actions in office, Putin shut down independent television channels. He rooted out the real opposition from parliament. He turned elections into meaningless procedures, turned parliament into a rubber stamp, and so on. He very quickly set out to establish a dictatorship. And all this time we saw, you know, one American president, George W. Bush, look into Putin's eyes and see his soul. We saw another American president, Barack Obama, push the reset button with Putin. And by the way, when Bill and I were working to get the Magnitsky Act in the US, it was the Obama administration that opposed it because they had their reset going on with Putin. And we had the same problem on this side of the Atlantic. I mean, you remember the former Chancellor of Germany by the name of Gerhard Schröder, who basically just sold himself to Vladimir Putin in a very literal sense. So yes, it was absolutely shocking and disgusting for me, frankly, to see those images coming out of Anchorage in August of this year, where you had a murderer, an indicted war criminal with an active arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court, walking down, you know, the red carpet next to the President of the United States, being welcomed on American soil. But this is something we've had to deal with for years, and at the end of the day, change in Russia will come from Russia. It is only the people of Russia that can change this regime, and I have absolutely no doubt that they will come, and that Russia will be a normal, democratic European country.
I remember when we talked to you last year and you'd recently been released, there was a sense of a little bit of frustration that you were put on a plane without any choice where you were going, and actually I felt that you really wanted to stay in Russia and bring the change from within. And I know that you plan to go back one day and be ready. And right now you're ready to seize when that small window of opportunity comes for democracy and to establish that in Russia. What are you doing? How are you preparing for that?
And that's actually been another very important focus of my work, because we do know, and I'm a historian by education, we do know that major political changes in Russia usually happen like this, swiftly, suddenly, completely unexpectedly. You know, both the Tsarist regime in 1917 and the communist regime in 1991 fell in 3 days, literally speaking, and nobody saw it coming. And so many mistakes were committed back in the 1990s, both by Russia and by the West, that led us to where we are today. And so it is one of my overarching concerns now that we must not repeat those mistakes the next time there will be a window of opportunity for democratic change in Russia. Because as I think the world has seen in the most horrible way over these past 3.5 years, what happens in Russia affects everyone. For as long as Russia is a dictatorship within, it is always going to be aggressive outside of its borders. So the only true guarantee of long-term peace and security in Europe is a democratic Russia, and that is what we should be working towards.
But what is the preparation?
There needs to be transitional justice. Once the Putin regime is gone, there will have to be full transparency and accountability for all the crimes that had been committed and still are being committed daily by this regime. This is something that never happened in the 90s with regard to the Soviet crimes. And here we are today, because when evil is not publicly reflected on and publicly condemned, it always returns. And the second mistake that was made in the 90s was that the West was not ready to help and assist and welcome that nascent democratic Russia as one of its own, to the family of Euro-Atlantic nations, in the way it was ready to welcome countries like Poland and the Czech Republic and the Baltic states. This will need to change too, because the only way Euro-Atlantic security, you know, Russia's the largest country in Europe. The only way Euro-Atlantic security is really going to work is when Russia becomes a normal democratic country that will respect the rights and freedoms of its own people and that will abide by the civilized norms of international behavior. I have no doubt that this day will come, but I think it is important to be preparing now for that window of opportunity to make sure we get it right.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio with me, Kate Chabot. If you'd like to be the first to get exclusive content, you can sign up for membership with the link below. You can also listen to Times Radio for the latest news or read it on thetimes.com. My thanks to our producer today, Louis Sykes, and to you for watching. Bye for now.